Well, g'day everyone. Welcome to the second of our Sonar Masterclasses. Happy Monday evening. I'm going to bring our guest for the evening on board, Rayner. Welcome along, mate. Great to be talking to you again. We've had a few conversations over the last day or two getting set up for this.
We have, mate. We have. Thanks for having me, Greg. And just like, as all things would happen, just like now, that has let go and never worked with kids, animals, and electronics. So
never do anything live, mate. You know, we can rehearse this 15 times and it'll go smoothly. But as soon as we hit the live button, we're away and running.
It worked so well last night, didn't it?
It did work well last night. That's right, mate. We'll get by. So
we'll make it up. We'll be right.
Mate, tell us what the weather's like down there. We've been comparing notes, and we're at opposite ends of the country, and we've got opposite ends of the weather.
Well, I think it says it all with the fact that Victoria has just been cut off from the rest of the country. They've just put a big fence around our state. We're not allowed to leave. And I don't know if that's just the coronavirus or the bad weather that we've got at the moment. But it's pretty ugly here, and that's an unfortunate downside, I suppose, to this COVID-19 that it survives better in this colder weather. And we've got this huge explosion, so we're going to be stuck here fishing for a while, I think.
Well, if you've got to do it, mate, you got to do it. So.
Yeah,
you got to get the right weather for it, and that hasn't been all that kind to you either.
No, it's it's a funny thing though, and one thing I do love about this time of year, Greg, is that your weather, it's either really good or it's really bad. You don't have that in between. So you're either going fishing or you're not. And when the weather's good, we've actually still got a swordfish bite, which is a bit late for generally this, what we normally do. And then when the weather's bad, those big bluefin tuna, well, that's the time to go and catch them, unfortunately. You know that because you've lived in Tassie, and unfortunately, the rougher it is, the better they like it.
I have, and that's exactly right. Yeah, we used to, it was that fine balance between being rough enough to have a real shot at the tuna and not so rough that it became unsafe. And we trod that line a little too closely a couple of times.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, look, we got we're pretty lucky here, 20 years ago, mate, there was not a lot going on, and you're pretty well, this time of the year, the boat was put away. And nowadays, it's you don't put the boat away, and most guys are running big boats. You're not buying a big boat to go snapper fishing. You're buying a big boat to go fishing for the tuna, the marlin, and the swordfish that are in this state.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, mate, we're just going to keep chatting for a little while before we get going with the masterclass proper. We've got a whole bunch of guys starting to come in and leaving some comments there. So, guys, let us know where you're coming from. So I'll pull a few names out there and just say a quick welcome. So we've got Kevin, we've got Jason, Sam, we've got Matt, we've got Wayne, another Jason, Kelvin, Jason as well. So we've got a few people, a couple of Jasons there. It must be a Melbourne thing, mate.
Possibly is, mate. Possibly.
Mate, we're going to talk about swordfish, and we're going to talk about tuna this evening. So as we were discussing a little bit earlier, kind of two different ends of the scale in terms of where you fish for them and how you use your sonar. So we're going to break this presentation up into two sections, and we might do the swordfish first. I think.
Sure.
No, we're doing the tuna first, weren't we?
Doing tuna first. Yeah. Look, it's definitely one of those things, Greg. The tuna are a shallow water thing nowadays, and we always used to think they were a deep water thing, and when they first turned up, they were. But the great thing about these big jumbo tuna is that they are close to shore. Like, you might be 20, 30, 40, 50 k's from the ramp, but you're only 2 to 5 kilometres out. So, and then unfortunately the swordfish is complete opposite. You drive and drive and drive, and then when you think you're doing far enough, you drive a bit further, and then you get to them. So, and it's good though, because it makes us use the different features in our electronics, and that's what I suppose this is all about.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's it. So the electronics play such a big part in all kinds of fishing these days, but particularly this style of fishing, as you're about to demonstrate to us. So, mate, we've got people coming in from all over New South Wales, all over Victoria. Cool. So thanks, guys, for jumping in there. Zdenko's asking, will we cover rigging baits for swords? Yes, we can. We haven't come prepared with photos or anything like that, but I haven't,
but I've got my swordie box. I've actually got my swordfish box right down here next to me, and I've got a tuna box right there. So, I'll do my best.
Yeah, he's wedged in the tackle shop there with the tackle all around him. So, no doubt we can get through just about anything as long as we're surrounded by fishing tackles. So
that's exactly right.
Now, guys, we have got some questions that were submitted earlier on via email, so we're going to go through those at some stage during the presentation as well. Lee's got a ton of great screenshots that are going to help him to illustrate what it is that we're talking about this evening. But of course, if you do have questions, you can post them whichever Facebook page you're watching from or whichever YouTube channel you're watching from. please feel free to post those questions. We can see them all coming up, and we'll try and get to all of them. We've got a fair bit to get through tonight, so I'm not gonna run Lee ragged, but we will try and get through as many of those questions as we can. If you want to be sure to get your questions answered, the best way though is to submit them before the live stream. Do it, in the week before. Jump onto the doclures.com/sonar page, and that way you can submit the questions. That gives us enough time to pull up some screenshots and things to help illustrate what we're talking about, which makes it a lot easier for us and a lot more, a lot easier for you guys to understand as well. So, Lee, mate, let's get started, shall we? And start talking about sonar and gamefish, tuna and swordfish. Well, let's get your camera sorted out.
My thing's let go again. That's on to do this differently. So, look, what we've got is we have our fishery is for our shallow water tuna, and that's what it is. It's shallow water, mate. Most of the water we're fishing is 40 to 70 metres deep. Okay, so exceptionally shallow water, close to land, and that makes it great because you don't need a big boat to do it. Okay, southern bluefin tuna, if I had to put one factor into this, this is one of those things. Everything worked beautifully last night, and then today we have problems. So
you're supposed to be the professional TV personality.
Mate, people would absolutely they would never watch the show again if they saw what happens when we make television and what an absolute circus it can and often is. So look, the reality is, Greg, that this show. The reality is, I'm getting pretty frustrated here. That this shallow water tuna stuff, it's bait driven. Okay, everyone says, what's the best water temperature? What's the best this? What's the best that? My common description of bluefin tuna is they do what they want, when they want, how they want. Okay, perfect example of this, the tuna bite we had last year on the big jumbo tuna, it started in about March and it finished in October. And it was the same fish in the same patch of the water off Portland, and there was just tons and tons and tons of red bait. And I think you'll see that in the first shot that we bring up. So, and the water at the start was 17.5 degrees, and the water at the end of the bite was 12.5 degrees.
And mate, I'm curious about how you know it was the same group of fish, and I suspect it's because you got to know so many of them on a first name basis.
Oh no, I didn't actually, but I know a lot of the other boys did. So no, what it sort of came down to was just the fish that were in the same areas constantly, and what we saw was fish getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was interesting that the fish were just getting fatter and fatter because they weren't burning the energy doing these huge miles traveling. And so we got one late in the season and it was 133 kilos. And if you go off its length to weight measurement, it should have been 110. So it was just an absolute pig of a fish. So, and you actually saw it through the season. They started 100, 110, and there was bigger ones and stuff like that. But people were catching these fish and you'd see them and go, it's a 110. And then they'd hang it up and it'd be 130. So, and 125. So they were just fish that were in exceptionally good condition. So that's a big part of it. It's just about the bait. You find the bait, you find the fish.
Now, speaking of bait, mate, you said the first shot we're going to look at is all about the redfish. So let's bring that first shot up, shall we? And what I'll do, mate, I'll just switch it over so people can see the full screen. They can still hear your voice, though. So feel free to give a commentary, and then I'll switch back as we need to.
Yeah, so what we've got here, and you can see they're 12.6 degree water. So there's a couple of things. First of all, we're 45 metres of water. This is out off a place called Grant Bay off Portland. So just off the back of Lawrence Rock and down towards the lighthouse. And it's one of my favourite areas to catch jumbo tuna.
I know, mate, we've got Terry Gartland here has just given me a shout out, and Terry's from that part of the world, and that's also my old stomping ground. So welcome, Terry. So sorry, mate, I just thought there's right. One person here that knows exactly where Kate Nelson is.
Yeah, beautiful. So we've got that there. That's actually a pile of red bait, okay, and that's very very small red bait, and that was probably one thing that made it harder fishing last year, and the fish so picky. The red bait were about 3 to 4 inches long. So, but there was absolutely tons and tons of them. And if you look to the right-hand side of the picture there, you can see the big depression in the bait, and there's two very, very solid arches in that. Now, that is 2 jumbo tuna. When you mark the school fish, I tend to find they're a much shorter, sort of more aggressive sort of tick. Those big guys, you do tend to get that very, very nice boomerang off them when they're sitting there. It's interesting, though, if you look at it, and the way I interpret this is, yes, you've got all this scattered bait from the left-hand side of the screen peeling across to the right, and it's pushing up towards the surface. But see how it's just like it's hollow in the middle? Okay, so but then the tuna have actually got a real depression in the bait, and then as we look to the right-hand side, there's a bit they're actually cracking off, and I would say that's the bit that they are really hunting, because it's very, very hard for it's like if you liken it to a lion or a couple of lions on the big savanna in Africa. They can't chase 500 wildebeest, so they'll single out one or two. And that's effectively what these tuna are sort of doing. So you find the big patches of bait, but when you find the bits that are cracked off, even if you don't mark the fish, that can also be when you get yourself a bite. So hopefully that helps people there, Greg.
Yeah, good stuff, mate. And what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to bring up one of the questions that was submitted to us earlier, because it's actually rather relevant to what you've just been showing us. So,
yep.
This is a question from Extreme Armchair Angler, and John is a regular listener to the ALF podcast and regularly sends me emails, and I really appreciate his support. But he's asking, how can I be certain that the bait balls that I'm seeing aren't leather jackets or just seaweed or something like that? Now, in this case, obviously, there's a couple of jumbo tuna there working those schools over, so it's pretty obvious that whatever it is, they're feeding on it. But if you're just marking up bait, you can't see any arches, mate. How can you be confident about what you're looking at?
Well, I suppose a lot of it comes down to trial and error, and it really does. And it sounds stupid, but the way you get to know what your sounder's reading and how to interpret it is to actually find out what it is, and it's interesting that I know that with my Simrad, I can confidently in season on the marlin, we're marking the bait on the edge of the shell for the marlin. You can go, don't drop on that. That's leather jackets. And you just learn the way they mark up. Slimy mackerel love to mark up in pinnacles and stuff like that. Your yakkers and your cow and young are often down on the bottom, things like that. And you just start to learn what your sound is showing you. If you do it enough, you can do it very, very well. You can pick the difference between sharks and marlin and things like that. So I think the only way to honestly say that is time on the water and to practice. And that's probably the honest truth there.
Yeah, good stuff. And mate, we've got a few questions coming through. So Cameron's asking, why does 200 kilohertz mark up better than the chirp when trolling? Is that something we want to address now? We're going to talk about the chirp a bit later on.
Yep.
But do you want to cover it now?
Chirp sends down such a lot of pulses, and it can be, sometimes I think it can actually overcompensate and pick up too much detail, and that 200 often just gives a beautiful picture, and it's well worth running both. And that's the great thing about these units. Now you can run both, and I think too many people get stuck. It's a really good question. Too many people get stuck on, do I run just, high chirp or low chirp? You can run high and you can run 200. And that's probably a better option. I know here in Western Port, Greg, when we're snapper fishing, 200 marks up snapper like an absolute beauty. And it tends to not mark up all the clutter in the water as well, whereas the chirp picks up every little bit of detail, every bit of weed, every bit of everything. And it can be often hard to really read it. So it's worth running both. Again, time on the water, marking around with your units, never just setting them once and going, that will do, even through the day as temperature of the water changes, depth changes, stuff like that. If you keep playing around with it, you will get best out of your unit.
Yeah, I mean, that's the trick, isn't it? You can pull your unit straight out of the box, stick it on your boat, put it on auto, and you're never going to get the best out of it. You really need to learn how to use it properly and experiment with it. You're not going to break it by changing settings.
No, it's exactly right. And that's the great thing about this Simrad gear. And that's what I sort of gauge it on. And I said to the people at Simrad when I first, whenever I get new stuff, I don't read the instructions, right? And this sounds ridiculous. I'm not an instruction reader.
Male.
Exactly. So, but what I like to do is go, what can I work out about this stuff without actually reading about it? And I can tell you now, I say to people, can you use an iPhone? People go, yeah, you can use a Simrad. And that's what you want. You want to be able to play around with it. If you stuff it up, just go back, change it. And that's the great thing about it.
Go back to the defaults.
That's exactly right. But even just go back a step or two and it'll be all good, and that's the great thing. And the more you play around with it, the better you're going to get out of it. You'll get out of those auto modes and you'll really start to see some cool stuff.
Yeah. Stenko, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but Stenko is asking, can you give us a run through on your transducer setup, please, Lee?
Okay, so in my current boat, 675 Haynes Hunter, I have two transducers. I've got the SS175 high wide, and that's what you're seeing in that previous tuna shot. It's a very, very good shallow water Transducer, and then I've got the SS175 low, which is what we use for our swordfish and our deep dropping and stuff. But with the upgrades now, with the your software upgrades and stuff like that, and even just this transducer since I put in the boat, the previous models that I had in with the Evo 2 Simrads, the low chirp was not that good until you sort of hit 200 odd meters. But I can tell you now, the low chirp now with the Evo 3s, it reads absolutely beautifully at 100 meters. And when I'm fishing 100-meter water, even marlin water on the edge of the shelf, 150 to 200 meters, I'm running both. And what's really interesting is that low chirp is picking up the bottom just absolutely beautifully. And we're finding some really cool bottom fishing ground. We're marking stuff close to the bottom that even the high chirp's potentially missing in those sorts of situations. So it's well worth having two. I run the two transducers. The bonus with your Evo 3 Simrad over the Evo 2s, which are just a wonderful unit, but the Evo 3 allows us to run high and low chirp at the same time and get the very best out of the whole lot.
Very, very good. Just bear with me, Lee, as I'm pressing all the wrong buttons here. So now it's my turn to... It's just fat fingers and too many buttons is just not a good combination.
No, that's
it. Mate, we've got another question. Gary is asking, is there a course that we can do to learn better how to use our unit?
Look, at the moment, I don't know if there is. I think there's going to be a bit more of it. I'm looking to do more sort of stuff, guys, where I'll be able to, hopefully in the future, go out with people in their boats and they set their units up, but show them how to use their units, show them what they're seeing. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's really easy to get all excited about, what you're seeing on your sounder because they mark everything up so well, but we need to know what we're seeing, don't we? So
be able to interpret that information.
Exactly. I think that the bonus is too, mate, you've got just what we're doing here. You've got live information at your fingertips these days, and there's some wonderful stuff on YouTube through the Simrad pages of bits of information that you can get. So, and certainly if you don't know, just ask the questions.
And I should mention also, folks, that when you do come to these live masterclasses, you can submit, if you go to the web page in advance, you can submit screenshots as well, and we're happy to look at those and help you to interpret those.
Yeah,
so
cool.
Feel free to do that. If you're not during this live masterclass, of course, you can always post them to the Simrad web page or the Simrad Facebook page, I should say, and ask for some help with interpreting. There's plenty of people there that are going to help you out. So
and there's
don't feel you're on your own.
No, that's it, mate. And there's guys out there that really, really know their stuff. The Bass boys and the Barra guys and the blokes up the coast. And if you can get in contact with a guy in your area chasing the species of fish that you're chasing, it's just so helpful. Yeah.
Now, Lee, I'm going to bring up the next of our... let me take that message down first. I'm going to bring up the next of our slides now. So just bear with me for 2 seconds.
Sure.
Tell us about what we were seeing here, mate.
Oh, it's pretty exciting, that one. But that there is, and as much as that's exciting, that's a school of school bluefin tuna. And that was out off Anglesey this Christmas, January sort of period. There was a lot of fish out in that part of the world. So, and you'll see there, they're much shorter, sort of more like really aggressive shape, sort of like marks on the sounder. That is bluefin tuna that are probably anywhere between 10 and 25 kilos. You see the water's nice and warm. It's 18.1 degrees. And this, again, it just indicates bluefin tuna do what they want when they want. And this was a phenomenal summer bite of fish that we had this year. So the big thing I'm sort of with this picture, I suppose, that I'm bringing up is just how differently the fish can and do mark up. And that sort of stuff that you're seeing there is exactly what I was talking about, that to me is a bunch of school tuna. And we were getting stuck into those down off Anglesey at around, I think that was sort of that January, sort of January, February sort of period. And there were some really nice fish there, but you can see they clearly do look different. There's lots of them in the school, and they do look different to the big bluefin that you saw in the last shot. So that's a different sort of scenario that we have there, a bit of warm water. And again, the water's shallow. That's the big thing that people will most probably notice, Greg.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Matt, I'm going to bring up another question that was posted earlier in the week because, again, what you've just shown us kind of leads nicely into that. Now, the question's more about billfish, but John, Extreme Armchair Angler, once again, is asking, how can I distinguish billfish from other species? And in this case, how can I distinguish school tuna from barrels? I mean, Yeah.
Yeah.
What are the different sonar signatures that you expect from the different species?
In most cases, I would say your jumbo or your barrel tuna, they mark up bigger. Like they generally mark up bigger. They're generally in smaller numbers. It's not, if you mark 6 or 7 big fish, that's a lot. A lot of the time you just mark 1 or 2 or 3. When you're marking a school like what's in this shot at the moment, you just go, oh my God, if this is jumbo tuna, well, get ready. But generally those big guys, they're not in as big a schools. Not saying they're not, but when they get into an area and they start to feed, they seem to crack off and do their own thing in smaller groups. And just, I suppose it's just like anything. The smaller fish are in the bigger the school, and the bigger fish are in smaller schools. Just probably a thing of nature. So that's how it is. As far as it goes from distinguishing billfish from other species, again, on my unit, I find my billfish just mark up as a really long stretched out, like very, very long stretched out sort of boomerang. I find the sharks are a bit shorter and fatter when you mark them up. So, but again, we're talking a lot of trial and error here, Greg, and that's what people need to probably do. Take note of when they mark a fish and when they get a bite, and go, okay, well, if that was what I marked and then I got a bite, there's a fair chance that was the fish that I caught. If it was a shark, take note of what that looked like. The other one you can do is you can take screenshots on your unit, which is exactly what we're looking at here. So if you mark something cool, take a screenshot of it. And it's a really good little diary memory bank sort of thing that then you can look back on later, because it gives you all this information, your speed, your water temp, your time, your direction, all those sorts of things, your depth, and it becomes very, very useful in your future fishing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to say, Lee, that if that's a school of jumbo tuna, I'm hoping that I've got my chiropractor's phone number on speed dial, because you're going to need it.
If that's a school of jumbo tuna, Greg, I'm pulling 4 of the 5 rods out of the water because I don't want to hook all of them. And it's an interesting one, Greg, just very quickly, that our tuna here, how they fight so hard. The boys in New South Wales go, what are you guys talking about, 3 hours on a fish and stuff like that? And I believe, when guys come down and do it, one of my very good mates, James Thackeray, James has caught so many game fish over the years, and he came down, he's going, what are you boys doing? And he came down, he got punched up by one for about 4.5 hours the first time he caught one. And it's just the cold water, the excessive amount of bait, and they're just sitting there, they're just chowing down the whole time, doing nothing, and then when you hook them, they're just full of beans.
Let's face it, even once they start to wear down, there's just a lot of weight there that's on its side going round and round in circles.
Exactly.
That you've got to pump up to the boat. So
exactly.
Hard work. Mate, this next screenshot is all about tuna on the edge of a bait school. So let me bring that up for you in a moment.
Yep. That is what I like to see. That gets me excited. Like, see how the marks are quite big, they're a bit scattered. That's a couple of big fish there, but you've got a big wall of bait there from going from sort of the middle of the screen across to the right, and it's solid bait, okay? But those tuna, they're on the edge of that bait. They're hurting it. They're just pushing the edge of that bait. They haven't got themselves into the middle of it. They're just sitting there on the edge. They're probably waiting, waiting for the bait to get into the right position, or they're working the bait into the right position to start feeding. And I love it when you come off the edge of the bait and you mark fish like that, because that is often the ones you get the bite on, because they're also waiting for that bait to crack off. So your lure comes zipping across the top of them and they think that's the bait that's trying to escape. And I've had a lot of bites off fish when you hit that scenario there.
Yeah. Now, Lee, David Wells is asking us, when you mark fish on your sounder, do they stay in the same area or do you need to chase or follow them?
Oh, this is a really interesting one. Down here in our part of the world, like, we get these workups and they're full David Attenborough workups. In fact, some of the stuff you've seen on Blue Planet has been filmed down on the Southern Ocean, the huge workups of gannets and seals and all that sort of stuff. So you get these workups, you'll mark the bait, you mark the fish, right? And it goes quiet. It's amazing. 3 hours later, there'll be a workup. You're like, quick, get over there. And it will be within a football field of where you saw the fish in the morning, or you had the workup in the morning. So they do tend to hang in those general areas a lot. Even if they clear out and the bait clears out and the fish disappear on the tide change later in the day, all of a sudden it comes back to the same spots. So it's just like marlin fishing. It really is just like fishing for marlin, that, as long as the bait's there, the fish will be there somewhere, and it's just a matter of hanging in that area, being patient and putting the time in, and you'll get a bite. We're there. How do I do my low set How do I set up my...
I'll unmute my microphone. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds better. Yeah.
Yeah, so Jason's asking how to set up your low chirp transducer for
when you're
underway.
Yeah, well, that's pretty easy. You just go into your menu and you just go into your source, and your source will have high chirp, low chirp if you've got two of them, or your that's the best thing to do. You just go straight in, go your low chirp, and you drop straight into it. You can even have your windows set up, your actual screen set up when you go into your sub menu, and you can have a high chirp menu, you can have a high chirp screen, a low chirp screen. You can easily change them, and that is the great thing about this sort of stuff. So play around with it while the boat's in the driveway. It's that easy. Yeah, you just play around with it and just muck around and drop and drag and make your own screens and stuff like that. So there's plenty you can do.
Good. We've got plenty of questions coming through. I'm going to knock off a couple more, and then we'll go back and have another look at another screenshot.
Sure.
So, Stenko's asking, do we call that active bait? I'll go back to the sonar if you like. So, would you call that active bait?
I would call that unhappy bait. That is not the most
I'd call
impressive.
that very frightened bait.
That's the stuff there. Certainly where the tuna are on the edge of it. There, see how red it is, and the edge is flat. That's because they don't want their bums to get bitten. They're basically like trying to get in amongst their mates and hide from. They're trying to get to the middle of the pack and get away from what's going to eat them. Look, that's just good solid bait. There is better shots that I have here coming up, which you just go, yeah, that's great bait. But that's a big piece of bait. Like, you think that's 2/3 of the screen long. That's probably a couple of 100 meters long, that patch of bait, and that's nothing on what was down there last year. So that's good. I like to see red in my bait. If it's got red in it, it's dense. But the fact that if you look from about the middle of the screen and then across to the right, there's no breaks in it, there's no holes in it, nothing like that. That sort of indicates to me that while it's solid, it's not really under attack. It's just that edge. Once we come off the bait, that's where those tuna are.
All right, let's move on to the next one, mate, because this is showing us something a little bit different again.
This I like. Now that is sad bait. Okay, so a small piece of bait that's been busted off. It's on its own. It's got two fish, giving it a really hard time. Okay, even the fact that see how it comes up in a pinnacle, and even though we're not marking a fish there, Greg, in the middle of the screen where it's a very sharp pinnacle of bait, look how red it is up there at the top, and look how flat that bait is on the right-hand side, okay? The fact that bait is just so flat on that right-hand side indicates to me, although we're not marking a fish, because he only has to be a couple of meters out of the beam or a meter out of the beam, we don't mark him, right? That bait being that flat indicates there's probably fish on that right-hand side of that bait that we're not marking. I would work that, and I would work that bait really hard. That's the sort of stuff I like to fish and get a bite off.
And I guess that, one of the points that you made when we were having a chat a while back was that, quite often it's those smaller patches of tuna. So I'm going to bring up this next slide. Quite often it's those smaller patches of bait.
Yep. Yeah, well, that's your small patches of bait there. Yeah, that's it. This one here, you have no bait. This is another little trick that I really love. So what we get down here, if people haven't fished down the west coast of Victoria, or just in Victoria in general, now we get tuna everywhere, is you get these workups, right? The gannets and the seals and all that sort of stuff. And it's like the tuna push the bait up, and then the seals hold the bait up and they push it all to the surface. And then the tuna just sit around underneath them, and you troll up next to them or do whatever you're going to do. And the gannets are bombing in on it. And it's really, really exciting. Like, it genuinely is. When you spot a couple of 100 birds diving in the water, you get up on it and stuff like that. But you'll often find that you'll have a workup, in one spot, and then there's a workup a kilometre away, and then there's another workup, and they'll just sort of keep going. We call them spot fires all day. They come and go. Oftentimes it's hard to get the bite on that workup, but I like to work the ground between the workups, and that's often where I get the bite. And it's like you've just got these roaming, marauding bluefin that they might have just had a feed. They might be moving from one patch of bait to the next, and it's often in the middle of nowhere, or just with a tiny little skerrick of bait in between two amazing looking workups, that you'll get a bite. And that's exactly what that shot back there shows. It was a couple of fish, literally went, tuna. And if we go back to that shot, see basically at the middle of the screen, up the top, there's a red streak going up, right? That there is a jumbo tuna, and I called it. I go, there's one coming, turned around, and he ate the short corner. So, that is the epitome of exciting jumbo tuna fish, and that was a fish about 120. So that's the stuff you're looking for. And this is another one too. So guys, when they're trolling around, they're marking tuna at 30 meters and 40 meters, and they're like, oh, they're not seeing my lures. Mate, they're seeing your lures. They're just not eating them. Like, they've got amazing eyesight, and for a tuna to swim 30 meters takes them about 2 seconds. So if they want to eat your gear, they eat your gear. But when you see those streaks coming up, it's time to get really, really excited. And that's exactly what that was. That is exactly what that was, guys. So.
Well, mate, you must have seen the message feed here, because Daniel's asked the question: if you find tuna feeding down deep, do you continue to persevere with surface lures, or will you switch to deep divers?
We always mix it up. I run a spread of 5 when I fish jumbos, but I always mix it up. I always have my X-Wrap or my diver out. They're very, very good lure. The Samaki Pacemaker catches a lot of big ones every year as well. The big switch these days is a lot of spreader bars. The Bond spreader bars, the Black Pete spreader bars, they are really, really effective for catching tuna. What I do with mine, though, Greg, is a lot of guys run their spreader bar and they run a lure off the back of it, okay, which is great, and the fish eat it, and it's all good. It becomes a bit of a mess when you get in near the boat. But what I do is I run my spreader bar off my teaser pole, which I use for marlin fishing, and I run him straight down the guts of the spread at the back of the prop wash, and then it's got no lure on it. And then what I can do is I have the spreader bar out and the X-Wrap run back, and he sits under it, okay? And then I've got 2 lures that sit either side of it, and then I've got my rigger lures back behind that. And what we're finding is the fish will come up and they'll bomb the spreader bar. One will peel off and eat one lure, then they'll go down, then they come back up, eat the spreader bar, eat another lure. And so you tend to turn it into multiple hookups more often than not. Well, not always jumbo fish, but the spreader bar is an absolutely deadly piece of gear to fish with.
Great tip. And this is the perfect time, guys, to remind you that once this live stream's all done and dusted and it goes up on Facebook, it's already up on Facebook, but once it's archived, you can also zap over to the Fishing Q&A website. So it's fishingqa.com/sonar, and the replay will be up there. So each of the questions that's been asked here, there'll be a hot link to that, and you can jump to whichever part of the video you want to get those answers. You don't have to watch the whole thing again, but it's not completely finished and gone once this live stream's finished. The video will be available there. So, mate, we've got another question here. Sorry, Dimitri, you asked this a little while ago. Now, I'm going to read it out to you because it's not all coming up on the screen, but Dimitri's asking what adjustments you'd make if you're fishing in rough or sloppy weather, because he finds that he gets interference, but he doesn't want to knock the gain down too far in case he might miss a fish.
It's going to be a juggling act. And even in the big boat, we're mucking around with it. You know, if you're in really rough weather, it's, you know, getting aeration under the hull potentially, and that's what's causing your transducer to give you a poorer read. Obviously, if you've got a transom mount transducer, it's going to struggle more in rough weather than a through hull transducer, because the back of the boat will get more aeration around it. What I do though, and even if I'm fishing for snapper, okay, if I find something that I think I like, or I see something that I went that looked like something, but I didn't mark it beautifully, I mark it straight away on the GPS, right? And that's why I would never have a different brand sounder to a different brand GPS. It has to be same, okay? Or you run the same unit, whatever. You see something, you mark it. That's what the beauty of this sort of stuff. Go around, get yourself in a good position, and troll back down sea over it. Okay, you'll get your best reading running down sea where the boat's running at its smoothest. You can even slow down if you need, and it's amazing how often you'll turn back around, run back down sea and go, oh, yeah, there's a couple of fish sitting there. Or that's a nice bit of bottom. So that's probably the best thing I could do. Run your gain as high as you can. Maybe run your colour up a bit more, because then you can run your gain higher, so you'll have more clutter. But if your colour's higher, then you're going to see the red better. So if you mark a fish in the clutter, you'll pick him up better.
Good stuff. Now, Eastbound's asked a question about chirp and swordfish. We're going to talk about swordfish in just a moment. So we'll get through the tuna stuff.
We are.
Eastbound, hold that question. It's still, we've got it there. We're not losing it. We're not skipping over it. We will come back to it a little bit later on. So, mate, I'll bring up the next of the screenshots to talk about.
Yep.
So here we have tuna that are off the bait.
Yes. So you've got tuna here that are off bait, but they're on bait. We've just got good bait. There's good depression in this bait. So there's obviously a few big fish there. Right in the middle of the screen, I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 fish down in that depression in the bait. what you can sort of assume is that they're obviously pushing the bait that's from the left-hand side of the screen down towards the middle of the screen. That bait's hugging the bottom, trying to get away from them. And when bait goes to the bottom, it's not a bad thing because it makes it harder to eat for these fish. They want to get it up to the surface because then they can get all up on it, like a spider monkey. So if you look at the bait going to the right-hand side, look how red that is on that edge as it's getting pushed up off the bottom. Off that patch of bait there, that was last season down off Portland, and we'd been fishing all day. We'd been marking fish all day, and we were literally on the phone FaceTiming one of our mates, Mark Sullivan, chatting away going, Sully, check this bait out. And I said, if we don't get a bite off this, I give up. And no sooner did I say that, and the shotgun went off, and we ended up with a 133 kilo bluefin. So that's the sort of stuff that you like to see, guys. That is just the stuff you like to see. When you see that, you get pretty excited. You've got active fish. You've got bait being busted up. You've got fish that are feeding and doing stuff, and that's exactly what that was. Well, we've lost you again, Greg. I can't hear you now.
I've got to remember to unmute that microphone.
Unmute that mic, mate.
I needed to have a cough while you were talking. Yeah. I didn't want to interrupt. So, Anyway, mate, I've got a question from Paul Harmer. So what's the best scroll speed to have your sonar set at when you're tuna fishing?
Okay, so I run my ping speed pretty high, okay, for this shallow water sort of stuff, and I run my scroll speed at normal or ×2. I don't run my scroll speed so high. I just like to get that really nice sort of curved mark. A lot of guys run it higher and you'll get a more stretched out sort of picture, but I quite like that compressed sort of, and I get a lot of the detail when it's running. I get a lot of the detail, when it's running that way, that's for sure. So that's how I do like to do it myself.
All right, mate. We've got one more question before we move on, and this is the last one for the tuners, guys, and then we're going to move on to the really exciting stuff. We're going to start talking about the swordfish. So the last question, mate, is again from Extreme Armchair Angler, who's a prolific guy with his questions. So when we're using side scan sonar, he's saying he assumes it's an asset for finding surface bait, but what does surface bait look like when you're seeing them on side?
I haven't actually got any screenshots of surface imaging bait. It's one thing I don't have, but it shows up as just streaks and patches, and the thing you look for is the shadows behind it, and certainly big fish mark up quite well on surface image bait, that's for sure. So it does mark it up very nicely, and it's actually not a bad thing. And a lot of guys do use it down here because they can get up on the side of these big workups and actually see what's sitting, if there is big fish sitting under them. And there's some guys doing very, very well using the side image, that's for sure. Yeah,
good stuff. All right, Lee, we've done really well, and thanks everyone for your questions. We've had a good solid half hour on tuna. Let's move on to onto swordfish, mate. So
beautiful.
Tell us the difference when we're using sonar to find swordfish. How's that different from using sonar to find tuna?
Okay, so this is a completely different ball game. So, hang on, what's happened there? Have I frozen that? Sorry.
No, so you're good.
Mate, what we've got happening here is 100% different. Sorry, Greg, I'm just going to fix this up. 100% different fishing scenario. So we were talking about shallow water, we're talking about high chirp. Now we're talking about deep water, low chirp. Off the edge of the shelf, fishing the slope of the shelf, and even out off the slope and onto the flatter ground and stuff like that. This is where the low chirp comes into its own. If you don't have a good sounder transducer setup, you are really peeing in the wind. That's the best thing I can say. Like, you can catch fish without it, but you're going to catch more with it. That's the truth.
All right, mate. Well, let's talk about how we do that then. So let's bring up that first image that you've got for us.
Yep.
Which is, of course, your CMAP image.
Okay. So this is the new CMAP reveal, and this will excite a few people. Like, this is what my GPS is showing me. It's an amazing mapping system.
That is exciting me, and I don't even know what I'm looking at yet.
Yeah, so this is the Bass Canyon off Lake's Entrance, and it's really interesting. It's an unbelievable piece of shelf that, if you look on your Navionics charts or your CMAP charts up and down the east coast of Australia, this is the most impressive piece of continental shelf on the whole east coast of Australia. So it's a piece of shelf that runs east to west, and then it runs north to south, and in that you can see there's little gutters and stuff running out off the shallower water into the deep. And then you can see GPS marks and stuff that I have there. That bottom canyon is called the Anemone Canyon, or Anemone. There's debate over what it's called. So that's way down south of Lake's entrance. Straight at the front, we have the Bass Canyon, and we have a whole lot of fingers of gutters that run, into that deep water there. So what's interesting with the swordfish is they obviously come and feed up in these gutters on the bait fish. But what's really, really interesting, Greg, is that we tend to catch them more on the flatter ground. And I know last year I did a chat at Exmouth for GameX, and I talked about swords, and the boys have been fishing these really, really steep walls and all the great looking ground. And I said, guys, try fishing the flatter ground off the steep walls, and they have been, and they've been catching a lot of swords. So this CMAP reveal, it's awesome for swords, but it's also awesome just for general bottom fishing, marlin fishing, finding ground. So it's a real game changer.
Yeah, good stuff. Now, mate, there's been a few questions. I'm going to just move on to the next slide. There's been a few questions along the way about using high chirp versus low chirp. Yep. Here's your chance to explain the difference, mate, and when to use each.
That's it. So if you see on the left-hand side of the picture there, you've got high chirp. We've got 15.5 or 15.6 degree water. But high chirp on the left-hand side of the screen. And it's showing us the bottom beautifully, absolutely beautifully. It's just not showing us the detail that's in between. The right-hand side there is the low chirp, okay? And as you can see, they're very, very similar gain and colour settings. And look at the difference. The high chirp marks one fish up there, at probably 160 metres. The low chirp is marking all sorts of stuff going on down near the bottom there, and that's the difference. That's why the low chirp is just so good. It's not about whether it reads the top or the bottom. It's reading what's in between that's important.
And mate, what were those fish, do you know?
Well, I actually thought they were frost fish, but I don't think they were because I looked at the depth. I've got another shot that's frost fish, but I think this was... I think it was a school of those. I can't actually remember what it was, to tell you the truth.
Doesn't matter.
I'm not going to make it up, but who cares? You can see the difference in the detail of that screenshot. So that says it all. When I show people that sort of stuff, I go, that's the difference, seeing what's in between the top and the bottom.
Yep. Okay, cool. So, guys, if you've got any questions on that, fire them through. So, Luke's asked a question about whether you use the bird mode on the radar to find tuna. So, I've just
put the new radar on, and we tried the bird mode on it, and it does seem to work. I suppose the biggest limitation that we have in a trailer boat is our height. So when you've got swell and things like that, that is going to definitely affect us for getting a better read. But the new Halo dome radar has been very, very nice so far to use, let me tell you.
We'll look forward to an update on that once you've used it a little bit.
For sure. Yeah, definitely.
Terrific. All right, so Troy's asked a question, how deep would you night fish for broadbill, and same locations as during the day, or do you fish shallower?
I would fish actually the same locations during the day and shallower. So I've caught swordfish or hooked swords and caught swords in 320 metres first thing in the morning. They definitely feed right up into the heads of these gutters and these shallower grounds at night, no doubt at all. But I would definitely be ticking just the outside edge of the shelf, 300 metres sort of area at night, because that's where these fish are pushing into, that's for sure. For sure.
All right, mate, just scrolling through to see whether we've got any other questions here. We have. Yep. So Anthony said, should see high detail release shaded maps on all sounders soon. It's not a question.
Oh, there you go. Look at that.
That'll be nice.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Let's move on to the next screenshot, mate.
Yep.
So just bear with me as I switch this over.
That one there. Right. Okay, so what we've got going on here is, so we've got low chirp. Again, this is a swordfish situation. We're in sort of 450 odd metres of water. We've got a nice feed layer here, and you can see the difference by tweaking up your colour and your sensitivity or your gain to get it right. But mainly the colour in this situation is showing us that we're marking a fish sitting above the feed layer. And what's interesting is how high these swords will sit in the water column. At the start, we used to think they all sat down near the bottom, but you'll mark them up even not far off mid-water during the day. So got good solid feed layer there. All those. And then in the middle of the screen up the top there, that's where there's two lines going down at like a 45-degree angle. That's the brick and the squid being sent down to hopefully get eaten by a swordfish. I don't think that one actually did. And those cracks in the picture, that is where we're just tapping the boat into reverse, just where you're breaking obviously the transducer's got a bit of white water going over it. So that's what those cracks are when you see that. That's just a reversing thing.
Now tell us about these feed layers, mate. What's that all made up of?
So a feed layer is, or a scatter layer as they call it, is just microorganisms. Like we were catching the other day when we were out there, we were catching some grenadier, and they were spitting up these royal red prawns. So there's tiny squid, there's prawns, there's tiny little fish. That's the base of the food chain. There's probably like little jellyfish, and you pull up all these weird jellyfish stuff stuck to your line and all sorts of stuff going on. So that's what that is. It's just a massive feed layer of microorganisms, and then there's stuff in there eating that stuff, and then the bigger stuff and the bigger stuff and the bigger stuff, and at the top of the food chain is the swordfish. So it's a lot of food for squid and things like that.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on. I'll just check and see if we've got any questions coming through. Oh, we have. So Mike's asked the question, when you're cruising around looking for a spot to fish in this really deep water, what speed are you recommending trolling, or are you going slower for swords?
We're going really slow. You could go around at 8 knots, but you're not going to pick up the detail. So we're going slower, but you can still chuck an X-wrap out the back or a diver out the back and just one skirt while you're doing it, and there's plenty of fish getting caught doing that. One of my mates, he does it all the time, and he always picks up albacore and things like that, which they use for bait and to eat. So no, but you go slow, and obviously the calmer the day, probably a bit quicker you can go, but you're looking just for a good detailed picture doing this sort of stuff, and you're not always going to mark the swords, guys. Everyone thinks we drive around till we mark a sword. No, we drive around till we find a really good feed layer. When we find the good feed layer, if we mark a sword, we get pretty excited, but you're just trying to find the bait. It's like driving around marlin fishing and you're not fishing until you mark a marlin. No, we tend to still fish when we're on the bait.
Yeah, good stuff. And that's a perfect segue into this next screenshot, mate. Isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. So this is a really good feed layer, this one here. So that one's it's a bit over 100 metres thick, that feed layer. And this one here, so we're in 428 metres and low chirp. And if you look on the zoom side of the screen, on the right-hand side up the top, there's a little mark horizontal with a red centre to it. Okay? That there is a sword. How do I know? Because I marked that and that was filmed on Fishing Edge, and I marked that sword. I'm like, well, I marked that, and I went, I reckon that could be a sword. And I turned the boat back around, positioned it, dropped the bait. It didn't even hit the bottom, and it got hit. And then we got the bait to the bottom. 10 seconds, bang. Brick was broken off, swordie was hitting the bait. So, and we had that fish on for quite a while before we lost him. So you don't always going to mark the great big fish. You're not always going to mark the swordie, but that was just find that good feed layer. See how red that feed layer is there. Starts to get solid. That's always pretty exciting when we're fishing for them. When it gets thicker and just more dense. Just like if you found dense bait marlin fishing or tuna fishing.
Good stuff. Now Owen's asking whether we get pike in 400 metres of water, and if so, do we use jackal chuppies?
Oh, you could do that if you wanted to. You could do that if you wanted to.
Nice one, Owen.
There's always one, isn't there, Owen? Thank you.
So another question that's come up, Lee, I can get it to show on the screen. Sure. So you actually troll with bait? No,
we don't. We tend to drift with the bait. So once we've got the bait down, we're drifting more, with the current or the breeze or whatever it is. We're actually trying to keep that bait down there. So we tend to be tapping in reverse a little bit to keep the bait down. Or if we're marking fish higher, we'll just let the boat drift, or quite often towards the end of a drift, which is we do about 45-minute drifts once the baits are down. So that last 10 or 15 minutes, I'll just let the boat drift if it's not too windy to pull that bait right up through the water column. We had a swordfish on 3 weeks ago, and we were literally winding the bait up on the drill. Like we were cranking it up. It's probably 150 to 200 metres off the bottom, and it got absolutely smashed by this swordie, which we proceeded to fight for 3.5 hours and then lose. So they do come a long way off the bottom when they need to.
All right. Another question here, one from Rod asking, how do you run your TVG for low chirp?
I run it fairly low. I just keep it always down pretty low. So saying that, the new software upgrade, you can put them right up and it will help. So I'm really focusing on the bottom, whereas your TVG is really good up for the higher level. So, and yes, it's still important to have your TVG right, but on the low chirp, you're really focusing on the bottom. If I'm looking on the surface, I'm really looking at my high chirp, and that's where you can run dual transduce or dual frequency transducers.
All right, Lee, let's go back to our screenshot. So what I'm going to put up now is a really good example of using your zoom.
Yes. Yep.
To better pick up that feed layer. So do you want to talk us through what you're doing there?
For sure. So I've used the zoom to obviously just get a better picture of what's going on. I've got the colours increased and the gain increased on that left-hand side that's zoomed. That solid red wall at the start of the picture, though, what that is, that's where we've run back up to a spot or we've run up to an area we want to fish. So I've had the sounder set up for drifting or going very, very slowly to get a good picture. So as soon as you start doing, speed, it just blacks out, and that's what that is there. As I pulled the boat back off the plane, that's where it's, and gone back to a slow speed, that's where it's cleared up, and I've got a good picture again. So it's easier to do that rather than readjust the sounder when you're going to slow down in a minute anyway. So I'd probably ran a kilometre, just leave the sounder as it is because it's all set up for going nice and slow, pull the boat off the plane, and then we're back in business again. And your zoom just gives you that detail that you need to see on the bottom.
Yep. A few more questions coming through, Lee. Some of these are not sonar related, so we'll just whack some up on the screen and work our way through them. So, real salty fishing, do you like to leave the brick attached or break it away?
We do both. The verdict's out. Some days if you're marking fish up high, definitely having the weight cracked off helps. If it's rough, I do like to leave the weight on. If we're fishing 2 rods, we'll have one with the weight cracked off. We'll send that down, crack the weight off, let that bait float up. And then we'll leave the weight on the other one. So it's an each way bet. It's an each way bet. If I was starting out, I would probably say leave the weight on, just because you've got a tight line and you can see like the swordie bite. If I put my hand this way, that's a swordfish bite like that. That's a swordfish bite at 500 meters. So it's pretty exciting after 2 days standing around watching a rod tip, waiting for that. Let me tell you.
Now I'm just having trouble getting this next message to go up on the screen, so we'll give another crack and see what it does. Here we go. So, what's the top current speed that you would drift, and what speed makes it too hard?
Okay, so we tend to fish for swords where there's no current. That's a good tip. All right, we look for areas where there's not current. I know over in Florida and that they fish with current, and they use that downrigger sort of style system with the weight up the line. But here we tend to have our best results, and that's probably because of the way we fish in areas where there's less current or no current. So our biggest battle here is wind and current, but it's wind. That's what really knocks us about. So that's why we tend to try and fish in the good weather, because it just, it's hard to drift, and then back into it. And it's hard to see the bites when it's rough as well. So strong current does make life very, very difficult though. So try and pick areas of less current, that's for sure.
Too easy. All right. So Mike's saying lots of questions. That's good, Mike. We like lots of questions. So do you prefer J hooks or circles for bait fishing?
Okay. The $20 million question. Swordfish are swordfish. You will never catch all of them. Okay. I use J hooks at this stage, and I do well with J hooks, and so I have no need to change. But I have mates who only fish circle hooks, and they catch lots of them on circle hooks. So even with the J hooks, we get a lot of them in the corner of the mouth, that's for sure. So it's personal choice. I have no need to change at this stage, but saying that, last couple of trips when we've been fishing a floating bait and a static bait, the floating bait we're running a circle, the static bait we're running a J. The one common factor that does seem to work with circles, when you get him on, give him heaps of drag. I mean 16 kilos of drag to get that circle into position, because he's racing to the top. The more drag, the better that hook sets. That's a massive, massive thing. Guys who aren't putting heaps of drag on them at the start do tend to lose them a lot.
Good tip there. All right, we've got one very important question from Corey here, mate. So Corey would like to know how many boxes of tissues you go through after you've lost a good tuna or sword.
Mate, when we lost that one the other day, we lost it. Like, you just see 3 people do this. The rod goes in the holder. There's not a word spoken. The motors, you put the gear away, shut the cabin door, start driving in, and about 10 minutes into it, someone goes, "Oh, we really wanted that fish." And then it's usually someone unloads on that person for saying something so stupid. So it hurts. It hurts. And it hurt. I don't mind losing a fish. I don't mind losing a fish when something goes wrong, like a hook falls out, whatever, you can't help that. But in this case, the top shot broke, and it was just one of those things. I hate losing a fish when you don't get to see him. And that's all we said. The 3 of us said, we just wanted to see him. We just wanted to see that fish and just to know how big he was. Because swords pull that hard. Just because he was 3.5 hours doesn't mean he was 300 kilos. He could have been, but it doesn't mean he was 300.
You just don't know.
You don't know.
And you never will, mate.
And I want my hook back.
Sorry to rub that salt in.
I want my hook back.
All right, look, we've got a couple more questions. We've got one from Perry and we've got one from Dimitri. But before we approach those, let's have another look at get another screenshot, mate. So let me bring this one up.
Yep.
So here you're talking about the thin line. What's the thin line, mate?
So you've got a feed layer, a scatter layer here. They're not always on the bottom. This one's actually up. This one's up nearly 100. It's probably 100 meters off the bottom. And while it's not overly thick, it's not even 100 meters thick. It's quite dense. It's got a fair bit of red in it. And then we've marked a fish under that feed layer, so between the feed layer and the bottom. But what's interesting too is we're marking some good bottom fish there as well. And they were actually some blue eye, because we actually had a hook up and got some really nice blue eye off that patch of fish there. That was a few years ago. So don't always think the feed layer has to be on the bottom and, that to catch the swords. And if it's up higher like that, then there's a fair chance that's when that floating bait is going to be very effective on those sorts of days. So just keep in tune with all that sort of stuff and you're going to get more bites.
I'm just going to bring up another question because it's relevant to what you've just said, mate. So Dimitri's question was, when you're chasing blue-eye hapuka, are you using bigger baits? And are you only fishing on the hard ground or drop-offs, or where do you fish for them?
I don't fish overly big baits from a blue-eye and hapuka. I just fish circle hook, rig, big paternoster rig, circle hooks, and I just like to fish the right amount of bait on that circle hook so he can come up and swallow it in one go. Naturally, hapuka and blue eye have big mouths, so that helps. But no, I don't fish overly big baits, but I know big baits can be very effective, like just even perch frames and stuff like that. So definitely. I don't tend to do exceptionally well at this stage on the bottom fish because we spend most of our time fishing the swords. And as I said earlier, most of the swordie bites come on the flatter ground more so than those steep walls and stuff like that. So your blue eye and your puka and that come on the steep walls, and then your swordies are on the flatter ground. So that's sort of how we do it. So my phone's starting to go flat. I'm going to have to plug it in a sec, Greg.
Mate, we're getting close. We've got one screenshot left to show you. We've got one question from Perry. We might kill the questions off there, guys.
No,
so
right.
If you do have questions, post them. If we don't answer them in the live stream, we'll answer them afterwards on the Facebook page. So Perry's asked a question. At times along the west coast of Victoria, there are some days where there's only two tides a day. Yeah, do you find this a fact to a barrel bite? So back to tuna here, but that's all right.
Yep. Yeah, so dodge tides are the best way to shut down any fishing situation. In most fishing situations, school tuna absolutely despise them. Jumbos don't mind them at all. So, have seen some good big tuna bites on dodge tide days.
There you go. There's the hot tip, guys. So, look, we're going to move on to this last screenshot, Lee.
Yep.
And we'll take it home from there. We've been going for a little while now, so tell us what we're looking at here.
This is a favourite. This is an all-time favourite of mine, this one. This is like you get a bit excited when you mark this. We've got a 150-metre thick feed layer that's quite solid. There's quite a lot of red in it. It's got everything going for it. And that line there is a 198 kilo swordfish sitting above the feed layer. We marked him.
How do you know it's exactly 198 kilos, mate?
Because we caught him. Because we caught him, literally went, there's a swordfish on the sounder. And then about a minute later, or not even a minute later, the rod started to, we had a bite on him, on the swordie and hooked him and stuff like that. Everything's on such a grand scale down there too, Greg. You've got to remember that just because you mark a fish doesn't mean 3 seconds later you get a bite. That's what people need to realise. So that's why I think fishing off the drop-offs is effective too. It's on such a grand scale. When a swordie's sitting out on the flat ground half a kilometre or whatever off a steep drop-off, that's like a marlin sitting right along the edge of the shelf. It's like a barramundi sitting on the edge, or a cod sitting on the edge of a snag, because we're talking drop-offs and stuff that are hundreds and hundreds of metres. It's just such a big, vast expanse that to them sitting on structure, they're sitting a couple of 100 metres off it. So I think when you get that in your head, you can understand why you sit off that structure just a little bit further. So,
well, they're such a fast-moving fish, aren't they?
Mate,
to go a couple of hundred metres for them is
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. It's just and it's just how they are. They're just a big, tough animal that's so impressive, and they just rule the ocean out there. That's for sure.
Yeah. All right, look, I've got 2 more questions, Lee, and then we're going to wrap it up. So, Rod's asking the question: what are the rules on using electric reels in Victoria?
You have to have a handle on your reel. Yep, and that was a big issue a few years ago. If it doesn't have a handle on it and be able to be, wound, it's classed as a commercial fishing tackle, you need to be aware of your rules and regulations for rigs and things like that. So again, and don't think we don't get checked. Like it can be 100 Ks offshore at Lakes Entrance. The police pull up and they will check you, safety gear, like alcohol test, everything. So I haven't seen fisheries out there, but that's the rules. You need to have a handle on your electric reel and it needs to be on a rod.
And of course, go and check the Fisheries Victoria website as well. Make sure you know all the rules. Get your rule book. Google it, whatever you need to do. But be fully aware. So, 2 more questions, guys. So, eastbound, other than low chirp, do you use a particular frequency for swords, and do you run a narrower beam or a wider beam to cover more area?
Okay, so no, I just run low chirp. That's all I do. I just run low chirp because it's made for this stuff. Which is, it's a slower pulse. It's a narrow beam, and it just gets down, so it gets down and it marks the fish. So if it was a wide beam, it would fizzle out trying to hit the bottom in 500 meters and mark anything, as well. So again, we're talking such vast expanses of water and depth and things going on. So that's the go. And when it comes to how do I set mine up, mate, I just run a bit slower ping speed, and again, I run a slower scroll speed, I run a bit higher scroll speed than I do for my shallow water stuff with high chirp. And you tend to get some really nice readings when you do that.
All right, last question, guys. We're going to let Lee go and have a cold drink and whistle.
Right.
So,
it's all right.
Mate, when you get a sword bite, do you try and set the hook or do you let him set the hook himself?
So this is how it goes on a swordie bite. He eats the bait, he does whatever, he's banging away at the bait, and the line goes slack. If the line screams off, a lot of the time, it's a bad thing. If the rod just keels over in the holder, it often means he's foul hooked. But otherwise, you sit there, you go, getting a bite, and what do you reckon? We got him or not? Start winding? Yeah, that's sort of how it goes. So, you can take it, Mia. Hey? Oh, you're plugging me in. Thank you. Cool. So my daughter's helping me with
the IT department's arrived.
The IT department. She's just shaking her head at me. She's going, get out of here, Dad, you idiot. No. So when we sort of get the bite and everything, a lot of time the line goes slack. It sort of goes all weird. And that's the swordie racing to the top. So from there's a bunch of different theories and ways to do it. What we generally do, myself and my mate Jules and I have gone, I think 9 from our last 11 swords that we've hooked. So, and we just tend to put the rod in the back holder, start winding, get yourself harnessed up, tick the boat just in gear, just getting away, just get that line tight, and we just wind. We don't do anything crazy. We don't gun the boat. We don't do anything mental. That fish is coming to the top. We're winding, and eventually everything's going to come tight. And you generally get 50 to 100 meters from the fish and go, oh, we're going to have this all done in a minute. And then everything just stops. And if all goes well, your fish rolls, heads back down to the bottom, and that's the time the hook tends to fall out, in that first roll when he starts heading back down. If you make it back down to the bottom or his first run, heaps of drag on him, fingers crossed he'll stay on.
Excellent stuff. Lee, it has been tremendous, and if that wasn't a masterclass in blue water fishing for swordfish and tuna, I do not know what is. So, tremendous stuff.
Thank you.
Heaps of great tips. It's been great talking to you. I want to thank you for coming along. I want to thank Navico and Simrad for getting behind this and putting this on. I know it's going to help a lot of guys to get onto some tuna and some swordfish. Of course, you've got to give Fishing Edge a bit of a plug, mate. So do that before we sign off.
Yeah, so Fishing Edge, obviously, that's my show. It's what I do. But this year, I don't think I'll be making a show, to tell you the truth, just with all this COVID stuff going on, guys. So I would say stay tuned. We will be doing stuff next year. We have some really cool stuff in the pipeline. And that's going to be a great year next year. But doing a lot of social media stuff coming up in the next period. I'm doing a lot more of this sounder stuff, just little individual photos coming up with clips. So stay tuned to what I'm doing, and hopefully if you've got any questions, guys, you can always contact me through Facebook and things like that. That's for sure, and I'm more than happy to help out. Excellent stuff. Now, folks, of course, next week we've got another masterclass coming up. We've got Paul Malov coming to help us find winter bream, which are obviously down a bit deeper at this time of year. So we're going to get another Lawrence lesson. So look forward to that. Make sure you jump over to fishingqa.com/sonar and enter your questions for Paul in there so that he can answer those and come up with some screenshots as well. So that's it from us, guys. Thank you, Lee. Thank you for having me. Your comments and your support, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye, guys.